Continuing our studies of the laws of Tzedakah Maaser, the laws of charity and tithing. Keep in mind the minimum that we should be giving or setting aside for Tzedakah is 10%. Some even say even higher, up to 30% of our income. The question is whether net or gross, and that we haven't discussed yet, but we will discuss those issues. Normally it is from the net income, not the gross necessarily, because all of this information must be all of the cost to getting the actual income must be deducted. But before going into that, we're going to look at who do I give this to? We saw there's a series of precedents set and established by Torah. And we saw in the last video exactly where we can give our charity or our monies to, our maaser. Unlike the world of the church, which they only give it to the church organization, the concept in Judaism is completely different. We distribute it to many different organizations. We are the, you might say, the steward of the tzedakah, the maaser, the tithing. Nobody else but you. That makes it completely different, that when you give it to someone entirely as an entity organization, they then distribute it on your behalf. In this case, inherent to this commandment of the tzedakah is the right of the donor to choose the recipient. It's up to you. This is referred to as tovat ha'anah, the benefit of giving tzedakah. One is therefore permitted to give his tzedakah money to any institution or organization of his choice. There are some conditions, though. Chazal instituted this idea of order of precedence, Kedima, as a means of guiding us to where and to whom it is preferred to distribute our maaser, our tithing funds. One cannot be forced to follow the system, since each individual has a right to distribute his tzedakah to whomever he wants. Nevertheless, one should try to follow this system, since it is halakhically preferable. This is why those arguments between, you have to give tithing, is it still required or not required? Even after the destruction of the Bet Hamikdash, even till this day, the Jewish people still give the maaser from their monies that is considered net income. Now, there are two considerations that must be taken into account when determining where one should contribute his tzedakah, his charity funds. First consideration should be to the individual to whom one is giving. One's relationship with the indigent will determine the order of precedence and how much should be given. First priority is to give to one's relative who are poor, followed by a different priority list from non-relatives who are in need. There are subcategories within this priority list. The second consideration is to the purpose for which the tzedakah money is needed, since there are certain tzedakot which takes precedence over others. The order of precedence also depends on the source of the money which is being distributed. An individual dispersing his own tzedakah funds would naturally have his own order of precedence, while the gabbai dispensing communal funds has a different set of priorities, and each will be discussed completely separately. Now, the halakhic source for the order of precedence is in the passage in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, that says, if there shall be a destitute persons among you, any of your brethren in your own cities, in your land that Hashem, that the Lord your God gives you, you shall not harden your heart nor close your hands against your destitute brother. Deuteronomy 15:7. From here the sages have derived a priority list for the distribution of tzedakah. One should first give to his relatives who are in need prior to indigent non-relative persons. That's the first level. Now this is, of course, according to Makor Lezor Hu Ayin Pei in Hasefri Perashot Re'eh. Now we're going to go into this because we should first give to our relatives who are in need, which means that the first mitzvah belongs to mother and father. The idea of honoring your father and mother is a priority, so that takes precedence. Of course, you say this in a certain other religious world, and that's completely, no, you can't do that. You have to give it to the church world. No, as a matter of fact, by us, giving it to any institution that's considered idolatrous is completely forbidden. Completely forbidden. We give it to organizations that are, we can give it to organizations that are not Jewish in order to create the harmony and the peace between Jews and not Jews to help human beings. But when it has to do with idolatrous worship, we are prohibited in doing that, in giving support, leaning support on that. Now, this is not to say that one should assign all of his tzedakah to his relatives who are in need and leaving nothing for non-relatives. Those guidelines will be explained later in these videos. Now, among one's relatives, there are certain priorities. Similarly, there's a priority list when distributing tzedakah funds among non-relatives. We're going to take a look at below a priority list. However, there are many factors that may change this complete order, as we are going to be explaining throughout the video. Here is a general list, so if you want to write down, you may do so. First person that you can give charity to, separate, if you yourself are in need. The donor himself. The wife and small children. The rabbi who taught you without taking payments. There's an obligation there. He is as if your father. Parents. Father and your mother. The commandment says, honor your father and your mother. So you could give part of that tithing or complete of your tithing to the parents. 6, grandparents. Number 5, grandparents. Number 6, young adult children. Even children sometimes need support, our backup. And by the way, this may even include through their education. Number 7, the rabbi who taught and was paid. So you have, first of all, the rabbi who was taught without taking payment. Now you have the rabbi who was taught and was paid. You give charity to him. Grandchildren. Brothers and sisters in need. Uncles and aunts on the father's side. Uncles and aunt on the mother's side. Cousins on the father's side. Cousins on the mother's side. Remaining relatives that may still be alive. Divorced spouse. Close friends. Neighbors. People of the same city. People living in Jerusalem. People living in the rest of Eretz Israel. People living in outside the cities of Eretz Israel. And this will give us an idea, and we're going to go into each one of these categories we just mentioned. Self-support. One is not obligated to separate or give tithing if he is not able to afford his own basic needs. Such a person is still obligated in giving a minimum amount of a third of a shekel, as we mentioned in other videos. He takes precedence over anybody else until his needs are taken care of. He is not obligated in separating tithing. Including in his own need is the obligation to support his wife and children until the age in which one is obligated to support one's children. We're going to take a look at that in the future video. In other words, to what age? We're going to take a look. Not necessarily it has to be at bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. Only when he is able to provide adequately for his wife and children may he consider how best to dispense his tithing funds. So the concept initially is you have to take care of you and your house first. If you are not making enough money and you're barely making ends meet at the end of the month, how can you give money if you are in need of charity yourself? So charity starts at home. It starts with you. It starts with your wife. It starts with your children. The basic nuclear family. So you can not give to institutions that basically drains you and you separate it, but you give it to yourself until you're able to support yourself and be able to grow. Definition of self-support. According to most interpreters of halakhic law, one should not be obligated to separate Maaser until he has his basic necessities covered. One may determine these necessities by what is considered basic within societies in which he lives in. So it becomes a relative definition. In addition, one who lives very modestly, regardless of the standard of society, nevertheless is unable to purchase items that he may need. One may first acquire his own needs prior to separating his tithe. Others maintain that such an individual is required to separate tithe. However, he then may assign it to his own needs. A rabbi should be consulted to determine what constitutes a basic necessity. And obviously, I'm going to talk about your rabbi or the one who taught you Torah free of charge. Who would be obligated to help support this rabbi if he's in financial need? Such a rabbi would even take precedence over one's parent, according to some positions. And Mekarohu Rama talks about this. For one's parents brought him into this world in Olam Hazeh, but by teaching him Torah, a rabbi helps him merit the future world, Olam Haba. And one would also be obligated to help a rabbi who taught him most of his learning, even if the rabbi receives money from teaching, but still finds himself in a financial need. However, one's parent should take precedence over him. It's still unclear whether the rabbi takes precedence over the grandparents and the other children. The poskim, however, maintain that nowadays, when we have so many sepharims from which to learn, these dinims of the rabbis do not necessarily apply. Yet, if you rely on the rabbi to teach you on these sepharims, it does apply. So who's your teacher? Who's your rabbi? Who's the one that you follow? And this becomes the main issue. For example, Ways of Israel has created an entire YouTube account, all in instructions of basic Judaism or Judaism's concept, for one main goal: to teach, to instruct, to clarify, to bring awareness to. And yet we don't charge for these videos. We can have you, if you want to learn it, to charge you for it, but we don't do that. And even if we were to charge you for that, that does not free you from the obligation for giving maaser or supporting what we're doing. It's an interesting thing. When people talk about money, they go haywire. Oh, he's charging for learning Torah. Well, let's see here. How will Torah glow? If there isn't no flour, there is no Torah, it says in Pirkei Avot. In Kemak, in Torah. Very clear. Parents is another category we're going to look at. If one's parents are poor, not only is one permitted to give the tzedakah money, but they take precedence over others. However, if one is able to support his parents without the use of tithing, it's preferable to do so. Even though we learned that one should not give all of his tithing money to one person, but rather divide it among many poor people. This does not apply to one's parents. He may give them all the tzedakah money if they need. Grandparents. If one's parents' needs are provided for, one should give his tzedakah money to his grandparents if they are in need. One's father's parents takes precedence over his mother's parents, and one's grandfather's precedes one's grandmother's parents. There is order to the idea of who to give. Young adults, if one's older children are financial difficulty and he wants to help them, he may use the maaser funds. Helping them takes priority over helping other relatives after parents and grandparents. The next category of relatives are one's grandchildren, and after one's grandchildren comes one's siblings, followed by the rest of one's relatives. One's spouse relatives comes immediately after one's own relatives in the list of priorities. Now we're going to continue with this concept of the precedence or Kedima regarding who we are to give our tzedakah and charity to. If you notice here, it only mentions one's institutions. Institutions of Torah learning, institutions that distribute it to the poor. Those are two basic classifications for institutions. In those institutions, usually sustain a whole plethora of teachers or rabbis or persons. For example, they ask me, well, why should we give to you, Rabbi Otero? One of the reasons why is because